Please listen carefully.
Hello and welcome to the Film Revered Podcast, episode number 9. This week brought to you by the Film Revered Patreon page. I'm your host, Zach Hamilton. Our guest for today's episode is VFX veteran and VES member Daniel L. Smith. But first, let's get into some industry news. Starting with some television news, American Gods Season 2 has received a brand new showrunner after previous showrunners Brian Fuller and Michael Green departed the series due to budget and creative direction conflicts with production company Fremantle Media. The new showrunner will be Jesse Alexander, whose previous credits include Star Trek Discovery, Hannibal, Lost, and Heroes. J.J. Abrams has just scored a straight-to-series order from HBO for his new and tightly under wraps sci-fi mystery series titled Demimonde. Very little is known about the series at this time, but this will mark Abrams' return to writing for television, as his last television writing gig ended in 2013 with Fringe. Abrams will also serve as one of the show's executive producers. In film news, big news for the Leonardo da Vinci biopic, as Paramount has just hired John Logan to adapt Walter Isaacson's biography, Leonardo da Vinci. Logan's recent writing credits include Alien Covenant, Genius, Spectre, and Skyfall. The film will star Leonardo DiCaprio as the painter and scientist Da Vinci. DiCaprio will also be co-producing the film with Jennifer Davison. The Men in Black spin-off may have just landed its director. Straight Outta Compton and The Fate of the Furious director F. Gary Gray is currently in talks with Sony on directing the film. The spin-off will not be a reboot of the franchise, and both Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones will not be reprising their roles. Instead, the film will focus on two entirely new characters. Steven Spielberg has also signed on to the film as executive producer. Illumination Entertainment has just landed a massive deal with Nintendo to produce a fully animated feature film based on the popular characters Mario and Luigi. Nintendo of America confirmed the deal on Twitter, stating the following. Nintendo and Illumination are partnering on a movie starring Mario, co-produced by Shigeru Miyamoto and Chris Meledandri. Lastly, Jim Parsons and Haley Joel Osment have joined the cast of the Ted Bundy thriller Extremely Wicked. Parsons will play Larry Simpson, the lead prosecutor of the 1979 Miami trial. Osment is set to play Bundy's longtime girlfriend's other love interest. The film also stars Zac Efron as Ted Bundy and John Malkovich as Judge Edward Court, who presided over the murder trial. Extremely Wicked is directed by documentary filmmaker Joe Berlinger. Now on to the trailer drops. The following trailers premiered this past week and are available to see now. Ant-Man and the Wasp released its first official trailer. The film follows Scott Lang as he takes on a new urgent mission after Hope Van Dyne and Dr. Hank Pym come to him for help. Unsane released an official trailer. The film centers around a young woman who is involuntarily committed to a mental institution, where she is confronted by her greatest fear, but she begins to become unsure as to whether or not it is real or a product of her delusion. Another terrific trailer to release this past week was for the film Hereditary. When Ellen, the matriarch of the Graham family, passes away, her daughter's family begins to unravel cryptic and increasingly terrifying secrets about their ancestry. Yet the more they discover, the more they find themselves trying to outrun the sinister fate they seem to have inherited. Lastly, the Netflix original film Mute released its first trailer as well. The film follows a mute bartender as he goes up against his city's gangsters in an effort to find out what happened to his missing partner. Coming up next, I have an interview with Daniel L. Smith. Smith is a 20-year visual effects veteran, as well as a director, writer, teacher, and 3D stereoscopic expert. He is most known for his work on Judge Dredd, Spy Kids 3, Game Over, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and his short film, The Solo Adventures. So please stay tuned, as we will now be taking a quick commercial break. This week's episode is brought to you by us, the Film Revered Podcast. Are you a fan of the show? Do you want to be involved in the start of a community of film fans? If so, check out our all-new Film Revered Podcast Patreon page at patreon.com/filmrevered. Here you will find behind the scenes posts about the show, receive early access to guest announcements and episodes. You can also choose a reward which will have me feature your name in a shout out at the end of one episode a month. There are so many more rewards to choose from, so please be sure to check out our page at patreon.com/filmrevered. Once again, that's patreon.com/filmrevered. All right, well, welcome to the show, Dan. I'm glad to get you on the podcast here.
Right on.
So for the listeners, Dan was actually the first person to ever introduce me into the concept of digital compositing. And honestly, without his initial guidance, I may not be working in the industry today. So a huge thank you goes out to you for that.
Well, of course.
Now, I would love to start by asking what first got you interested in film and television?
You know, a lot of people my age and in the VFX industry, they're what answer you'll most often find is they'll say Star Wars. And for me, it really wasn't Star Wars, although I was about 6 years old when the first one came out and I really enjoyed those movies. I never really thought of them as something that I could do. So what happened was about 1981, there was another movie that starred Harrison Ford that really got underneath my skin, and that was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I had, before that movie came out, I had a graphic novelization of it that showed the whole ending of the movie and everybody turning into skeletons, and I thought that was so cool. And one of my friends, me and my friend Mike, we went to go see the movie, and I knew that part was coming up, and I was waiting for it, and then Tote's head melted on screen, and I was transformed. It was like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. And in that moment, in that singular moment, I was like, I got to do that. I want to make that. I want to make something just like that. And I immediately started trying to figure out how could I do that. Was it clay? So I started sculpting clay heads and trying to melt them. Was it made out of wax? I don't know. So I just did all this kind of stuff, and I never had access to any stop motion cameras or film cameras or even video cameras. I mean, this is the early 80s. But it really did capture my imagination, and I almost immediately started trying to do little flip books and animation on paper and drawing this stuff out. And I made a melting head, and I ended up like doing lots of flip books with people exploding and heads exploding and blood and lots of gore. And so for the longest time, I thought that's what I was going to do, that I was going to do 2D animation. And I was really enamored by seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff of Star Wars and Ghostbusters and how they would hand paint things like lightning and sparks and create cloud effects and all this sorts of things like that. And I got really caught up in like, this is going to be so cool. That's what I want to do. I want to do that. And, you know, I ended up going to an art school for traditional illustration and graphic design. And I always thought those foundational skills would allow me to go into filmmaking. But I found that a very difficult transition.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, if I recall, you actually did some like special effects makeup and creature effects starting out in the industry. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, maybe not necessarily starting out. In my early years, yeah, I did do some special effects makeup for some video game work. In the mid-90s, I worked at a company called Westwood Studios, and their big claim to fame is that they invented the real-time strategy genre with Command and Conquer.
Oh my God, I love that game.
Yeah, it was a terrific game, and I was right there during the beginnings of that. But I went out there and I did a bunch of makeup effects for another game that they were producing called Lands of Lore 2. And
Ah, all right.
that was a lot of fun. But ultimately, I went out to Westwood because they were going to make a Blade Runner video game, and I was obsessed with the movie Blade Runner. And it kind of got delayed, and I was put on some other projects. And at the time, I had just come off of my first feature film job on Judge Dredd, and that going from like doing really high end stuff to doing video games, and at the time, gaming is not like it is now, where we've
Yeah.
got super high definition, high frame rate, everything. Everything was getting like taken a notch down and highly compressed to run on the
Yeah.
machines at the time. So I became increasingly frustrated with the process, and I decided to move on.
Yeah, definitely. I could imagine. I mean, you put all this work into it, and then all the detail gets completely lost when you compress a video like that. So, what I'd love to talk about though is what you mentioned. You were a pre-visualization designer for the '95 film Judge Dredd. How did you hear about the position, and how did you land that job?
Well, that was really interesting because when I first got out of school, I got hired on the spot to go work at a company in Virginia called Gardy McGrath. And they were just basically a video company that did kind of corporate films for government and local businesses. I worked there for about 2 years, and I worked with a lot of good people there. But ultimately, the kind of work, the flying logos and things like that, weren't that fulfilling. I started asking myself, it, on one hand, I was learning CGI
Yeah.
very early on the Amiga using a video toaster and Lightwave 3D, and I came from a 2D traditional art background, and I was translating those skills into 3D, and that aspect of it was really fun. But doing the work, making flying logos and stuff like that, it just wasn't there for me. So I heard after 1993 rolled around and we went out and saw Jurassic Park, my world changed. And I was like, why am I doing these flying logos when that's what I want to do? I want to be doing dinosaurs. I want to be doing photoreal effects. And so I started looking around trying to learn about the various software like the Alias and Softimage, which was what the high end guys were doing in film at the time. And I had no access to that. Here I was using Lightwave on a video toaster, and nowadays we can just go to Autodesk and download Maya, right, for
Right.
free. You know,
Insane.
and back then, Softimage was $60,000, and you had to have $100,000 Silicon Graphics machine even to run it. So there was no entry for that. You either had a job, and then you got to use it, or tough luck. So I was trying to figure out how I was going to do this, and I ended up, doing a lot of research into SIGGRAPH, and me and another friend, Paul Westbury, we took a trip down to Florida, in Orlando, of all places, in the summer of 1994, to go to SIGGRAPH, and it was being held down here in Orlando in '94. So in '94, we came down to SIGGRAPH, and they had this job fair. So I came down with resumes, I came down with demo reels, and I applied everywhere. So I applied at Pixar, ILM, Tippett Studios, Dream Quest Images was another place I had an interview with. And I remember growing up, I was a big fan of comic books, and one of the comic books was, the 2000 AD series from Great Britain that featured Judge Dredd, and it was a longtime favorite of mine, and I remember seeing on the job wall this picture of Judge Dredd with a logo over it saying, Synergy Effects wants you. And so I sent off my demo reel to Synergy, and lo and behold, I got hired on the job. And they wanted me to work in this department called Previs, which I never heard that word ever used before. And neither did most people at the time.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, as far as I know, we were the first Previs team ever formed for a feature film, at least in the digital sense. Before then, they would do some form of pre-visualization, but they never called it previs. They would like on Star Wars, they would build up foam core maquettes of sets and put little action figures in it and use lipstick cams to like figure out shots and things like that. But what we did on Judge Dredd was what we call now tech viz, where you would take a shot and you'd design it in the computer in the same way that it would be practically shot. So we would be speccing out the shots with fully rigged camera cranes or gantry motion control systems or motion-based hydraulic systems like a McFadden 6 DOF system. And we would have to animate it the way you would do it in the real world, because then all the motion data from out of Softimage would be run through a script to translate its XYZ trans and rotate data into Cooper gimbal data that could be imported directly into the MoCo camera system, and then recreate the shot.
Gosh, that is so awesome.
Yeah, so we were doing that back in '94, and I worked on that for about 9 months.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you talk about the fact that arguably it was the first film that did it digitally, and then I can only imagine. You're talking 1994. Obviously, now most people who've watched any behind the scenes of any film that's come out within the last 5-6 years, they're always talking about previs process, right? Like it's just like a standard because it's a way for you to basically film the entire movie without having to have the crew to do it and to get an idea of how it looks. But to be doing that back in the mid 90s is just crazy. So.
Yeah, and who I really need to thank for that is my boss and supervisor at that time was a man named Colin Green. Not only did he give me the job, but Colin had just came off of another job at Synergy where they were hired to work with Douglas Trumbull on his Luxor project, where he was doing a bunch of ride films for the Luxor Pyramid in Vegas. And he came out of architectural school and decided to fuse what he understood about computer graphics and Softimage and all that with doing previs work for Doug Trumbull. And pretty much most of what Synergy Effects was left over from the Trumbull company when he did the Back to the Future ride and the Luxor rides. So I came into this incredible team of amazing talent. Our the VFX supervisor was Joel Hynek, and he later won Academy Award for What Dreams May Come.
Jeez.
The assistant VFX soup on Judge Dredd was John Gaeta, who won for the Matrix films. And he was kind of like when Colin wasn't around to supervise the previs team, I interfaced a lot with John and learned a lot from Mr. Gaeta himself. And it's like the nexus of talent that was happening at that time was insane. And I just can't believe that I got to be there at that point.
Especially at that point in your career. I mean, you're talking about basically a dream team as far as visual effects is concerned.
Oh, yeah. And then later the company got renamed to Mass Illusion because we were in Massachusetts. And they went on to they started on the Matrix films, but then later got renamed to Mannix, got moved out to California, finished the Matrix movies. Then, I mean, you know how the industry is. People
Yeah.
come and close, and it was a good time though.
What a great start, though, seriously. So, after your work on Judge Dredd, you'd go on to work on several other projects before landing the visual effects supervisor role on the television series Gary and Mike, which first aired on UPN, then on Comedy Central. The series was awarded 2 Primetime Emmys for Outstanding Individual and Animation, but unfortunately would still be canceled after its first season. First off, what was it like working on Gary and Mike?
Well, that show was a blast. I mean, just soup to nuts because the not only did I get to work on it, but the studio that I was working at, which was Will Vinton Studios, was a dream for me. From my earliest days, you know, everybody knows the California Raisins commercials and Domino's Pizza Noid and the claymation that Will Vinton Studios created. And when I got to work there, I spent 5 years working there and worked on a lot of things like the M&M commercials and got to learn a lot about stop motion and just getting to work on some TV series like Gary and Mike, and then later worked on the 3rd season of The Projects, the Eddie Murphy stop motion show that was on Fox. It just was a blast. I mean, I never had so much fun as working on that show because of its like very subversive humor, and there was a lot of real creative problem solving on that show because it was a road show, and every week we had to create all sorts of new sets, and that kind of cost was too high. So I was on a team that came up with the concept of creating the sets from kind of like a real world photogrammetry matte paintings.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I called it. But what we were doing is the art department would come up with designs and use photographs from the real world and photo bash images together and then print them out on a large format printer, glue the images to foam core, and then cut them out and create little dimensional sets.
Oh my gosh.
So it was literally like a matte painting with a bunch of cards, like you would do in Nuke, except it was in real life to create these stop motion sets. Because our other show, the PJs, was centrally around one location, so they could spend a lot more money building a set that was super detailed and dimensional, because it was reused show after show after show.
Yeah.
And they couldn't do that for Gary and Mike because the locations are always changing. So
Yeah, that's definitely a huge obstacle to overcome. I mean, budget-wise alone, I can only imagine. What would you say is your favorite episode of Gary and Mike, the series?
well, definitely if you go on Google, you can see most of them on YouTube.
Yeah.
But there's one called Cult Status, in which the father from the 1980 show Eight Is Enough is a cult leader, and he's trying to convince all these people to strap themselves to a Scud missile and shoot themselves into the comet Hasselhoff.
Oh my gosh.
Now, if that doesn't get you interested in watching it, then obviously your sense of humor is not mine.
Yeah, no kidding. I actually remember you screened that particular episode in class at Dave's school, because for the listeners that don't know, that's how he introduced me. He was actually my instructor at Dave's school, where I went to school in Orlando. But yeah, I remember seeing that, and I hadn't really heard. I think I had seen something about Gary and Mike before, but it never really registered. And then when I saw the actual episode, I was like, oh man, I've seen one of these before, but I hadn't seen that particular episode. And though it is only one of 3 episodes I've actually seen, I would say it's still probably my favorite too. It's hysterical. So, and there was a lot of good voice talent on that show too, because you also had, oh gosh, I'm trying to think here real quick.
Well, the lead Mike was Harland Williams,
That's,
and
yep, Harlan Williams.
little known fact that also Bryan Cranston was on the show and part of the ensemble. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, so there's some really good people behind it. So
I absolutely love it. And what I guess, and, and obviously it's not a fun topic to talk about, but I have to imagine when you were working on that episode, obviously you talked about some of the budget concerns with it being a road show, but it sounds like you guys came up with a really efficient way of fixing that problem. What were your thoughts when you found out that the show is going to be canceled?
yeah, well that was a rough day, definitely. And what really was aggravating about it was not only did it get canceled, but it was canceled before it even premiered.
Jeez.
Yeah, we were originally supposed to do 13 episodes, but what happened was after we completed the first six, we were prepping for show 7 and 8, and that's when we got the news that Fox. It was originally designed for Fox, and it was going to air after The Simpsons, but they decided that they were no longer interested in it. And the show was owned by Big Ticket Television, and the producers had decided that they didn't want it to go away. So I had only worked myself on the first six episodes, and I started prepping for the other ones. But at that point, I got moved on to working on the projects and doing some other work at Will Vinton. And then there was a lot of drama with the Will Vinton changing ownership. And I had moved on from the studio at that point when they had finally sold the show to the UPN network, and they decided to complete the back seven. So then 13 got completed, and then it finally premiered about 2 years later after I was no longer working there.
Oh my gosh.
So it sucked when it got canceled, even before it got to go on the air. But then finally it got done, and I finally got to see him on TV, so that was awesome.
Bittersweet. But I mean, I the irony of that situation, right? It's like pulling out too soon because, here they are, they're like, we're no longer interested. And then it goes on to actually air and then win 2 primetime Emmys.
Yeah.
Like,
it's the business we're in, man.
it is, unfortunately. It's not very public, that side of the business, but unfortunately it is. And amidst your film and television work, you'd been working on some ride films and special venue projects. What would you say was your favorite ride film or special venue project that you worked on?
Well, my first ride film venue project was at Will Vinton when we decided to do an Eminem 11-minute short film that was for the Eminem Studio Store in Las Vegas, Nevada. And that one is still running today. You can still go down there and check it out in Vegas. And that also was my full indoctrination into stereoscopic 3D, because up until that point, I knew of 3D. I thought it was cool. When I was younger, my father had stereo cameras, and he took stereo pictures in the 1950s.
Oh my gosh.
And I was exposed to this, so I always had an affinity for stereo. So when this opportunity came on, I was like, ooh, me. I wanna take this on. I wanna be the lead technical director to figure out all the aspects of stereo 3D.
Yeah.
And so I took that on, and that was really special to me because it was my first one. And I was able to learn so much about stereo 3D and how to engineer these rides and these fixed venue projects.
Well, and I love the fact that the legacy remains. I mean, you could still see this even to today in Vegas. You just go there, you can see it. That's so awesome.
Yeah, in this industry, so many things that we work on, like, oh, you got to finish it, and then it's done, and it goes out there, and then 6 months later, nobody ever knows
Right.
about it anymore. I mean, less so for big blockbuster movies, but a lot of the smaller projects, smaller TV shows, and especially television commercials that I've worked on, they just die and go away. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, so the having something that I worked on like almost 20 years ago is still running is awesome. Oh, and also like the M&M's commercial, that's the Christmas special one with the Santa, and oh, he does exist. They do exist, and they pass out. I worked on that one back then, and that's also really nice. That every Christmas, there it is.
Right? Because not a lot of, like exactly what you said. There's not a lot of commercials that have that longevity, and every single Christmas you can guarantee see that M&M commercial.
Yeah.
It's a good commercial. That's partially why. But the fact that that's one of the ones you worked on is awesome. It's so crazy. It's so awesome.
Yeah, I worked on probably about 25 different M&M commercials, but that's the one that is still there.
So not only do you have a ride film you can still see in Vegas, but you also have a commercial that airs annually.
Yeah.
And speaking about stereoscopic, shortly after Gary and Mike, you were hired as a 3D stereoscopic supervisor for the Robert Rodriguez film Spy Kids 3 Game Over. What was it like working with Robert Rodriguez?
Oh, that's a trip, man. Yeah, that happened, and I remember reading like Ain't It Cool News, and I saw that Robert Rodriguez was doing another Spy Kids movie, which was, oh, okay, that's cool. And it said he was going to do it in stereo 3D. And I'm like, what? That's so cool, because I had been working on several special venue projects and ride films like the last few 3 or 4 years. You know, there was the M&M one, and then after that, I went back to one of the companies I worked for on Judge Dredd, and they had just, which was Kleiser Walzak, and they had just completed working on the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man for Universal Islands of Adventure in Orlando. And they were doing another ride film for Busch Gardens. So they brought me on to be their stereo guy for Busch Gardens. And we did this Corkscrew Hill ride film that played for about 10 years down there in Williamsburg. And then after that, I worked on this thing for Radio City Music Hall. And we did a 2-minute 70 millimeter stereoscopic intro to their Christmas show.
Wow.
And then me and a bunch of guys from those two companies got together. We formed our own company called Powder Keg, where we did several other, like 5 or 6 stereo theme park attractions for various little smaller theme parks that nobody's probably ever heard of. But and that was really fun. Lots of fun. So I am like up to my ears in stereo, and it was so exciting to see that after almost 20 years that somebody was actually trying to do another stereoscopic movie. And it hadn't happened since the mid 80s, when a bunch of horror movies went, oh, we're going
God.
to do 3D again. So,
Yep.
you know, you got the Jaws 3D, Amityville 3D, Friday the 13th 3D.
Yep.
And that quickly died because it was on film and they still didn't understand 3D like we do now. So here comes Robert wanting to do Spy Kids 3D, and Robert wanted to do his other film that he did with Tarantino, Dusk Till Dawn, as a stereoscopic 3D movie.
Oh
And
my gosh.
Yeah, and they never let him do it, and it would have been too expensive, especially to shoot on film. But the big difference here was James Cameron had just done a 3D documentary called, about the abyss in the Titanic. You know, it was like Ghosts of the Abyss, and where he did digital high definition cameras with a special stereoscopic rig that him and Vince Pace had co-developed, and they shot this documentary. Now, James Cameron and Robert are really good friends, and Robert basically said, "Hey, I know you're planning to do this Avatar thing, but could I borrow those cameras first?" And
Right?
he took the same cameras that Avatar was made with, and basically shot for Spy Kids. And so I'm reading all about this in the trades, and I'm like going, "Oh my God, that's going to be so cool." And I was looking for a job, and Computer Cafe in Santa Maria, California, was looking for some compositors. Since I was a comper, I decided, hey, I'll reach out to them. And then they saw that I had all this 3D experience on my resume, and I literally, from the time I reached out to them to the time I was on an airplane going to California, was about 2 days.
Holy cow, that is fast.
Yeah, they were like, "Oh my God, we need you. Come out here. We have no idea what we're doing. This is stereo. Nobody's done stereo before in a feature film since the age of digital."
Right.
So what was really cool is I became their stereoscopic supervisor, and we supervised probably about 20 minutes of the film. We took care of the staff battle sequence and the flying pig with Steve Buscemi on the back of it, and a couple other miscellaneous shot sequences throughout there. But nobody had done a stereoscopic 3D film for mainstream audiences in so long that nobody knew how to do it.
Wow. What would you say you enjoyed most about working on that film?
Well, not only did I enjoy working on it because of the challenges that it involved, but working with Robert and working at Cafe FX was just really wonderful. They treated their artists really great. It was such a blast. The people that I got to work with there and meet, and when Robert would come to the studio and do stuff, and look at reviews and look at shots, what I love about Robert Rodriguez is he is a collaborator. He's not one of these directors that is like so rigid that I have a vision, you must do it my way, blah blah blah.
Right.
He was so collaborative that if you just talk to him and say, "Hey, it'd be cool in this shot is what if we did this?" He would be like, "That's so cool, do it," and he had no problem like taking the best idea in the room, even if it wasn't his. And
Wow.
and that was a huge relief, because I had worked with some previous directors that will remain unnamed, that were just so rigid and what we like to call, I'm not sure what the language barrier for your podcast is, but
You go for whatever you want. It's an online show, so.
well, so people, sometimes you refer to some directors or some VFX supervisors as pixel fuckers.
Oh, there you go.
They see that they obsess over that one pixel over there, and they just and they just want to fuck it to death until it's what? I don't know. What did you do that made the movie better? Nothing. And Robert was never like that. He was always in service of like making the film cool. And you always and he would never approve a shot like, "Oh, it's approved." You knew the shot was approved if he saw it, and you just heard him go, "Cool."
I love that. It's so different. I like
Yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah, if you got a cool from him, you knew you were good. And that's really awesome.
It just feels more special. I think, you know what? It feels like it's more personable, I think, than just like approved. It just seems like it's like a task done. Whereas like
Yeah.
a cool, it's like, all right, he digs what I did for this shot. Awesome. That's so great.
Yeah, you knew it was good.
Wow. Yeah. And then speaking of pixel fucking, that's definitely a term that I am okay with on the show because it is literally a visual effects term. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't. I wish it wasn't so common that it's a term that everyone knows. But, having worked in visual effects myself, I mean, I've definitely come across situations like that. And it's in your mind, you're just trying to be like, I hear what he's trying to get out of this one pixel, but I don't know what else I can do for this or it's just different iterations. Like, oh, you know what? If you could just do this slightly more like this, and then it matches 20 versions earlier is the exact same thing they want now. Yeah. But anyways, we won't go on too long of a rant on that, but it is definitely an ongoing.
You could do a whole
dilemma.
show on that.
Right. That could be the name of the show. It would cut some of the audience with the term in there, but people would know what it's about for sure. So, but focusing more on stereo, I guess, having had such a career in stereo, what are your thoughts with regards to the state of 3D for film now, be it native or filmed with, or converted later?
Well, I think the state of stereo right now is very sad. And the sadness is the way the industry has taken something beautiful and molested it into an unrecognizable shell. That's it's just terrible because 3D is beautiful. We see in 3D. 3D is natural, and they've decided that it didn't even happen until Avatar came out. When Avatar came out, they just went, "Oh, 3D? Well, we'll charge extra for that." Because when Spy Kids came out, you went to the theater, they just gave you glasses. The ticket didn't cost more money. And, Spy Kids started this modern revolution. But as soon as Avatar came out, now it's premium. You have to pay $3 extra if you want to see it in 3D. Even though the glasses themselves, when the theater buys them in bulk, they're basically 10 cents a piece.
Right.
I mean, they're not losing money on that. It's just, and you could even reuse them if you wanted to. You could bring your own. In fact, I do. I have special stereo polarized glasses that I bring to all my 3D movies because they're better than the ones that they hand out, just in clarity, and they don't look as goofy. They look more like regular sunglasses. But as far as like whether it's converted or film native, there's not that much difference anymore. The quality that comes out of places like Stereo D and Legend 3D, it equals or rivals native stereo, and all the post-production uptick that has to come out of doing these films, it doesn't really matter which way you go, because most of these films these days, I mean, there's so much CG work in them and so many set extensions and so much stuff going on that you're getting Z passes out of the render, you're getting native passes for your creature animation, that even when a film like Star Wars The Last Jedi was converted by Stereo D, 90% of that film was already 3D because it's 90% generated in the machine anyways.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't matter anymore. And the quality of the stuff that they do convert is beautiful.
Yeah, it's a new skill. Literally, it's a job. Stereo compositor. Yeah, it's interesting in speaking about all the Z passes because one of the first jobs I got to work on, or one of the first assignments I got when I started in the industry, was stereo packaging. So there's a difference between stereo packaging and stereo conversion, obviously. But stereo packaging really does very highly illustrate the fact that a lot of this is already in the system. You're already getting the passes. What it essentially means in layman's terms is you take a final shot, right? And we'll talk about Justice League for this example. So you'll take a final shot and you will take this massive script in Nuke, which is a software that we use. And we're talking like a script that it will take 3 seconds just to move around in the script. There's like a delay because it's so massive. You compile that down to all these renders of the content so that it's a lot smaller, easier to convert. But pretty much, at least in Justice League, I would say 9 out of 10 shots I would get on my desk, they would be completely CG, 100%. So in essence, they have Z passes for everything: the characters, the set environment, all the FX that's going on, explosions, everything like that. So it definitely is interesting, and it's also really cool to a degree. But it's also, I think, maybe a little concerning for people who have built a career around stereo conversion as a stereo artist, because now you're getting more and more CG coming in, and then a lot of your work's already being done, but you still have to compile it and still do, the other aspects involved. But there's a lot of films that are very heavy CG.
Well, and a lot of part of the conversion process is what I call depth grading, where you're deciding which elements are going to go back into screen space, which elements come out into negative Z space, and adjusting all that stuff so it's comfortable for the viewer, gives dimension but doesn't assault you and
Oh God, yeah.
hurt your eyes. So there's a lot of finesse still in there.
Definitely, yeah. So, I mean, and obviously the same argument can be made for green screen studios, scaring, prop designers and stuff like that, or, set designers, because obviously green screen is eliminating a lot of set design because they do it digitally, but there's still a call for it. It's not going away yet, hopefully. So, not to be all negative on the show now. I feel horrible. I'm not trying to call it doomsday here in the film industry, but unfortunately those are side effects of us doing our job well. So, but moving on, after you wrapped on Spy Kids 3 Game Over, you had what we in the industry would like to classify as a 911 call. And calls with regards to a particular scene in the much-loved Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. What can you tell the listeners about this call and what they wanted you to do?
Yeah, that was an interesting phone call. I was working at Real Effects in Texas at the time on a G.I. Joe movie, and one of my former employers called me up and said, hey, we have a couple shots from Azkaban, Harry Potter 3, and we can't figure this out, and would you be willing to do it? And I was like, hell yeah, sure. What does it need? And, it's just 2 shots of Harry getting the Marauders map, but the film was shot by Alfonso Cuarón, and if anybody's seen his other films like Gravity or Children of Men, Alfonso really likes long takes. So they had this really long take of them going into the building and walking up these steps, and there's Daniel Radcliffe sitting on the steps under a green blanket. And what's funny is he doesn't take the invisibility cloak off until the next shot. So he's sitting there on the steps, and they needed a clean plate to go to fill in the blanket. The problem is they shot a clean plate, but the cinematographer, which is Chivo Lubieski, likes to use handheld cameras. So this was a steady cam shot, not motion control. They filmed it, and then they filmed a clean plate. You can't really film a clean plate with a handheld steady cam, right? So
No, you cannot.
So these guys at this place that I used to work for were just, trying to track this moving camera shot and trying to stabilize it to fill the hole. And it just wasn't working, and they were going up against the wall, and it was like 3 weeks from release. And so what I decided to do was to track the shot, model the room and the stairs, and texture it with photogrammetry from the plate. And much of the modeling and texture work was done by another artist named Dan Macron. So the 2 Dans worked on it.
Right.
And Dan, curiously enough, Dan is now a supervisor at Weta.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I believe he worked on the Ego sequence of Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So
The company you keep, Dan.
Yeah. Well, you work long enough in this business, you work with a lot of good people. That's just how it is. So I he did the textures and the models, and I did the tracking and the comp side, and then we got it out the door.
Dang. And it's just so ironic because realistically, they could have just filmed it without him in the scene. As you
Yeah,
touched on,
yeah,
he doesn't take the blanket off until the next shot. So realistically, he never even needed to be in there. But in a way, it's like kind of like a trusting moment. They're like, oh, well, our VFX guys can handle this. So let's give them something, they can handle it. But at the same time, it's like, but you didn't need us for this shot in the first place. And now you've created this 911 situation because no one can figure out how to fix this problem that could have been avoided.
yeah. That's the kind of stuff that happens all the time now. So
Sadly. So, well, and outside of visual effects, you're also a writer and director, and a short film of yours that I would love to highlight, given the timing, is The Solo Adventures.
Oh, my.
Now, for those who don't know, this film won Best Animation at the official Star Wars Fan Film Awards, which, again, for people who don't know what that is an annual contest put forth by Lucasfilm to showcase and acknowledge the growing genre of fan films made by, for, and about fans of the Star Wars saga. First off, what was it like being a director for a change?
Well, the director role was a lot of fun. I mean, that's it's a whole different aspect of it, and getting to be with a team of people that are fulfilling your vision and trying to shepherd that was a totally different kind of scenario. But a lot of things like that changed for me when I decided to come down to Orlando and teach instead of be on the box all the time, and to step away from the box and bring those ideas to fruition. But the Star Wars film was actually like my first time directing anything.
Yeah.
And that was a very big change, and one of the best the best experiences in that was just trying to come up with the ideas, trying to write the script, and see it through to the end. And you know it's tough when you have a concept and you got to get all these other people on board with that concept and execute it, and then at the end seeing it, putting it out there to the world and seeing how it does.
Yeah, and I mean, the visual effects artists on the film were students at the time. This was their final project, so you're also dealing with new talent. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean bad talent by any stretch of the imagination. You're getting to start working with people that could go on to have great careers, as we talked about earlier, in the company that you keep. But I have to wonder, did you think at the time that you were making the film that it would be as successful as it turned out to be?
No, hell no. I mean, on one hand, it served the objective. It was meant to be a final block project for Dave's school, and that's all it was really meant to be. Everything that came out ancillary to that was like bonus. So I had no idea that it was going to go viral.
Right.
It's been seen probably about 2 to 3 million times by now,
Oh my
and
gosh.
it won the award. Back when we still had G4 TV, they called me up and secured rights to broadcast it on their show, Attack of the Show, and they and what's really cool is they dedicated their almost entire show to it. They like. Every commercial break, they were like, the best Star Wars fan film ever. It's like,
Oh, that's spectacular.
really, ever? I don't know. I've seen some other ones that are much better than this one. I'm not sure you
Like, I'm
know
not going
it.
to fight you on it,
Yeah.
though. I mean, please hype me up, hype the film up, but at the same time.
Yeah. So, but that was really cool, and getting to win the award was really neat because Lucas at that time was still owned Lucasfilm, and and he had a hand in picking the winners. And at Star Wars Celebration, when I won the award, you had Dave Filoni, who's the head director of the Clone Wars, and Seth Green from Robot Chicken and Austin Powers movies.
Yeah.
Those two guys are who gave me the award on stage, and it was like
Oh my
really, it was
gosh.
like, hey, this is really cool. But yeah, it was really the students' work, though. I mean, they're the ones that made it successful. I mean,
Exactly, yeah.
I was just there, kind of shepherding it together, but they were awesome.
That is so great. And I guess, speaking on the solo adventures and its popularity, I'm sure it's only continued to grow in popularity, especially with the upcoming Han Solo standalone film, which is now being directed by Ron Howard. What are your thoughts on that from what you've heard so far?
Well, my thoughts is I love how their logo looks very similar to a logo I came up with. So,
Right.
and yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that show because they originally hired Lord and Miller from the Lego Movie to direct that movie. And then they fired him after 80% was finished, and now Ron Howard is in there. And, you know, as much as I like Andy Griffith,
Oh man, go with
I
those retro cuts there. Holy cow.
just don't. I just I just can't put my finger on a single Ron Howard film that really made me happy. No, I was never a fan of like Willow or any of his other movies. I he's not. I think he will do a competent job, but I don't think it's going to be spectacular.
I'm going to put you on the spot here right now, Dan. You are telling me that this spectacular movie I'm about to name is not a movie that touches you? Beautiful Mind. That's not a terrific film?
That's all right.
Oh my gosh. All right. You know what? To be fair, not exactly a sci-fi film. So there is that, but still.
No, it was a good movie, but
Bearing
it's
in mind that was in 2001, so I had to go back pretty far back to find a film that I think that you would like. So,
no,
but Apollo 13.
yeah, Apollo 13 was compelling, but I honestly I saw it. It was cool. I love Bill Paxton, but if I want to see the story of Apollo 13, I usually watch something on the History Channel and not a dramatization.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. We will move on. So, something I would love to talk about, though, and what we were talking about with the solo adventures, is the fact that this project came to you from being a teacher at the Digital Animation and Visual Effects School, also known as Dave School, at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. What made you decide to focus your efforts on teaching?
Well, after working in the industry for like 20 plus years, it wasn't really that I was getting tired or like not able to do the hours or anything like that. It's just it's all comes back to the the stereoscopic. Like I had done so much stereoscopic work that after with Avatar coming out, I knew there was going to be a watershed moment where everybody's going to jump on the stereo bandwagon. And I predicted that the back in 2008, and because I knew that movie was coming, I knew it was going to be stereo. I knew Cameron was going to knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
It just was it's an easy foregone conclusion. But what I didn't see was in software and the industry as a whole understanding what stereo should be. And it still is, to a certain extent, it's still that way. And especially when you look at the way people talk about VR and AR today, everybody talks about, oh, well, gee, to do 3D, to do VR, you just hit this button, this setting, and this software.
Oh, God.
And nobody's talks about the human factors, how our brains understand 3D, how we can use 3D to better understand the human condition, how it affects your emotional side as well as your physical side. And that got me kind of going down the road of like creating my own training material and trying to write a book on it. And I started to work on a DVD series. And at that point, a company called FXPhD.com, which are out of Australia, the online training, they they had contacted me to produce some training material for their site that talked about the way Nuke implements stereo workflows. So I started making that stuff and I started working on my own stuff, and I was really enjoying teaching. It was like for years I was one of those people that was a little selfish. I was like, you know, I know this and I'm going to keep it to myself because that makes me valuable. I can secure having a job because I'm the only one who can do this, right?
Well, and at the time, I think that was relatively valid because it was still a relatively growing industry. I mean, obviously, I see what you're saying and being selfish, but there weren't a lot of people doing it at the time. So being one of the few
Yeah,
did make
but
you valuable.
yeah, so well, I had some influences in my life that kind of like beat that into me and said, you know, that's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. And I found that in doing this kind of 180 of like saying, "Hey, wait a minute. I want to share. I want to share this knowledge. People aren't doing this the right way. I want to share what I know." I found that very liberating. I loved it. And I had, if we go all the way back to earlier in our conversation where I went to Orlando to go to SIGGRAPH to,
Right.
find my first big job. I also met this man named Jeff Sheets at that time, and he had been just another VFX guy. And over the years, while I was doing this, he had worked on Babylon 5 and worked at Foundation Imaging, and then he decided to start a visual effects school in Orlando called the Dave School.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the years, he had written me emails saying, "Hey, Dan, how'd you like to come down and teach? Hey, Dan, how'd you like to come down to teach?" And I was like, nah, I'm not interested. So he had contacted me again while I was working on these training materials. And you know what? I was like, you know what? Yes, I'm ready for this now. I am ready to flip the switch and go from, taking to giving. And
Yeah.
that was completely, that was my turning moment. And I absolutely love teaching. I love not only, I love having students that struggle, that are not good at what they do and they don't understand it and they struggle and struggle and struggle, and then you have that moment, the moment of clarity, the moment where everything changes for them and you can see it in their face. You can see that it clicks and it changes everything for them. That's the moment I enjoy the most.
Yeah, it's one of those very rare it's something that's usually only achieved by being a teacher to see something like that. You
Yeah.
know, it's I love that. Yeah, I mean, I personally, when I took your class initially, I was like, what is compositing? I hadn't even heard about what compositing was at that point. I was still relatively naive to the industry and all the different jobs. And once I started doing it, I'm like, because originally when I went to day school, I wanted to be an animator. And when I took compositing, I'm like, nope, this is definitely what I want to do. It's just so cool because essentially when you are done with that shot, that is what people will see on the big screen. Like, you are putting in those final touches. You are making it look that extra bit photoreal. You're assembling all this great work that's been done for the film through the pipeline. And maybe I'm underselling the job a little bit and you could do a better description. But
No, you're doing a great job. That's exactly what I love about it. And I started my career thinking I was going to be an animator. and I did animation for a while. And as things progressed, I was like, "What are you doing over there?" "Oh, we're putting it all together." It's like, what? And that's what gravitated me towards compositing, was being able to craft that final image and make it beautiful as possible.
It's an awesome job, but at the same time very demanding, because you are the end piece for the most part, unless obviously it's going to go on to be stereo converted, but still they'll be converting your final shot. And so the problem that comes with that, though, unfortunately, is if there are mistakes through the pipeline, they'll be like, oh, they'll fix it in comp, and then ultimately you end up having to do all these little shortcuts to try and fix something last minute. But overall, it's a terrific experience, and I love the job.
It's the ultimate problem to solve. It's a puzzle, and that's what I love about it.
Problem solving is makes up most of your job there.
And then, of course, one of the best things about teaching people this process is then going to the theater or watching a TV show and going, "Oh, look at that! There's Zach's name."
Yeah.
And
Right.
or any other one of my, probably by now I've taught well over 1,000 students, and
Gosh.
it's awesome when I see somebody's name and it's like, holy crap, there they are, because I knew that they came to me with a dream, and there it is. That's awesome.
Ah, I love it. I love it. It's a great industry and surprisingly small. And you do see a lot of people like that. And I even get excited myself, not even teaching people, but just having worked with people or met people and seeing like where they go on to, and then seeing their name. It's cool. It's like, oh my gosh, like I was in school with this person, or I worked with this person, and it's exciting.
Yeah,
So.
definitely.
Well, thank you so much, obviously, for letting me pick your brain and letting the audience learn so much more about your career and your thoughts in the industry. Something I would really like to do, though, since I have you here, is I would like to get your thoughts and predictions on the 16th Annual VES Awards and the visual effects category for the 90th Academy Awards. Yeah?
Oh, hell yeah.
For the listeners who can't see, I will say this just so that you're not missing out. Dan is wearing a rather flattering Blade Runner 2049 hat right now. So just a heads up, may have some standing on what his predictions are. So that being said, I would like to go ahead and focus here on VES first. Now, that's the Visual Effects Society, for those who don't know. And you're actually a member of the Visual Effects Society. How long have you been a member?
A little over 2 years right now.
Okay.
I always wanted to join earlier, but just never got around to it. And the VES has been amazing. It's an amazing guild to belong to, because they do nothing but promote the visual effects industry and give it a lot of validation.
Yeah.
Because we're often a misrepresented group. I mean, after all, our credits are last on the list, and and that's what the VES is. It's not a union. It's more of a honorary society, and getting to vote on the awards is probably my favorite perk. Lots of
Oh,
people
yeah.
love getting the screeners or whatever, but I love the awards because of the before and afters that we get to see that nobody else gets to see. And those are really awesome.
Definitely. I love that. Yeah, it's something that I think most visual effects artists aspire to be a member of the VES. And unfortunately, yeah, like you had mentioned, it is more of an honorary guild in the sense that it's not a union. And I'm not going to get on a soapbox and start talking about that because, that's a whole nother thing. But there is a reason why we are at the end of the credits. And a large part of that is the fact that we're one of the few job roles in the film industry without a union. So
What's really interesting is the VES has a magazine called VFX Voice, and we're in our 4th issue right now. And VFXVoice.com is the website, and you can actually go there and you can read the digital version completely for free. And VFX
Really?
Voice, yeah. And in the current issue, there's a wonderful article about visual effects credits and why they are what they are. And it goes through the whole history of how the different guilds and the different unions are required to be credited, and why visual effects artists will probably never be credited in the way that they want to be because of all these competing agreements and laws that are already in place. And
Yep.
we're kind of the last people to the table. So we have to sit in the back with the kids and not at the big boy table.
Yeah. I mean, unless you are at the client studio, for instance, like 20th Century Fox or Marvel or the main film studio behind a picture, you're not going to get top credit as a visual effects artist. Obviously, visual effects producers and supervisors, like I said, if they're at the client studio, they're usually even before the actual main credits. But again, those are overseeing all the different vendors. They're not the actual vendors making it. So not to discredit their job, but that's what it takes to get before the credits start instead of at the end. So it's a big hill to climb. So, but let's talk about some visual effects artists here and the nominations that are coming out for the 16th Annual VES Awards. Now, bear in mind, there are a total of 24 categories. We are not going to cover all of them. We're just going to cover the ones that I think Dan will have a really good insight on here. But we will leave a link for the full list of nominees in the link dump on our site. So let's go ahead and get started here. So for Outstanding Compositing in a Photoreal Feature, we have Blade Runner 2049, which was the LAPD approach and the Joy holograms. That's what's being nominated. We also have Kong Skull Island, Thor Ragnarok, in particular the bridge battle, and War for the Planet of the Apes. So what do you think for compositing in a photoreal feature?
Well, I think all of the nominees are flipping amazing. I mean, this is one of the years. I mean, every year there's nothing but great work out there. But this year there's so much really, really, really good work. I mean, Kong was really great. Thor was amazing. Nobody can say a bad word about what Weta does in those ape movies. They look phenomenal. But my pick is Blade Runner, and that goes, and that's because the character of Joy and her holographic nature was off the hook. It was some of the best compositing I've ever seen, and how they made her look like an actual hologram and not just a simple transparent layer was phenomenal. And it wasn't really until the VES showed up that I knew exactly how they did it. I watching it, it was like I'm trying to think of all the different possibilities of what they could do.
Yeah.
And one of the possibilities that occurred to me was like maybe they did some sort of 3D solution to try to like refract light through it and get like some sort of. But I was like, no, there's no way. She's in too much of the film. That's ridiculous. No, that's exactly what they did.
Oh my gosh.
Every shot that actress is in there, and she's a hologram, which is all of it, they roto-animated a fully 3D digital double on there so they could get the back face polygons for seeing through the volume. And it's
Holy cow.
And then they beautifully integrated it to the point where it doesn't even look like it just looks like it's there in the shot.
Right. You're not focused on how they did it. You're just like, yeah, that makes sense. We have those, right?
Yeah,
even though we definitely don't.
It was beautiful. Between that and the digital Rachel that looks just like Sean Young did in the original film, holy crap.
I would say to date, still probably even rivaling, Guardians of the Galaxy. I would say it's still the best face, like digital face I've seen.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, obviously you're doing, no, I would say that beats out Guardians of the Galaxy by a long shot.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you're dealing with an actress that was in the original film, that was full frame, full size, had a very unique look, and they recreated it perfectly. And when I saw the film the first time, even with my eye, I my immediate go-to was they found somebody that looked similar enough, and they did 2D digi makeup to make her look more like it. You know, some grid warps, some patches, the kind of stuff that, you know, Lola does, and it just it was blew me away when I found out it was a full CG solution.
Yep. Well, and interestingly enough, it was not my particular studio in Vancouver, but it was the company I was working for last year, which is Moving Picture Company, that was responsible for that. And it was such a well-kept secret. Again, I mean, even when you're watching that film, you're not expecting to see Rachel at all. And so the fact that when that does come on screen,
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot of us, until the movie even came out, no one even knew, except for the exact people that were working at that particular studio knew about it.
And then just think of the balls of the filmmaker, Denis Villeneuve, who put on the screen a shot from the original film just moments before they brought them out. So just in case you forgot what she looked like, they put her out there. A shot from the original film, it's there, and then they bring out the digital double, and it's like, if that wasn't perfect, it would, you know,
Dude, pure confidence in your team to make sure that they can actually pull that off. It's the only way you can put a shot like that. Only way.
yeah, it's good stuff.
Now, we're going to veer off just for the one time here because we're still dealing in compositing, which is what we both do, and talk about television here. So the next category is outstanding compositing in a photoreal episode. Now, Game of Thrones makes up a majority of this list. Game of Thrones was nominated for Beyond the Wall sequence and the Frozen Lake. They were nominated for Eastwatch. They were also nominated for The Spoils of War and The Loot Train Attack. And then also rounding out the list, we have Star Trek Discovery. So 3 out of 4 chances for Game of Thrones to take this award here, but obviously for different scenes. What do you think is going to win this category?
You know, I'm still struggling because I haven't voted yet for these. Mm-hmm. And I'm still, you know, I watched all these clips, and I still don't know which one I want to vote for. I think it's definitely a Game of Thrones. I'm leaning towards the Loot Train Attack. The dragon flying around and all the fire and people on fire and digital doubles it looks so good. But I'm also kind of leaning towards the Eastwatch section, which is basically the finale, spoilers, of last season, where the Night King revives the dragon, and the dragon is flying at the wall and blowing blue fire at it and destroying the ice wall. And it's like, that's such an incredible sequence, but it's really hard to pick between the two of those. But I'm probably going to lean towards the Loot Train Attack because, you know, when comping, nothing is harder than broad daylight. And to make that look real. And the Loot Train was during daylight, whereas the other two sections have a very heavy blue grade on them.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that sometimes that's our secret sauce when a shot doesn't quite look quite good. Mm-hmm. You know, you color correct it, you blur it, you grain it, you ship it, right?
Exactly.
And that's not taking anything away from those sections. It's just, it's harder for me from an objective point of view to just look at the work and go, was this harder or was this harder? Because they're both so good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, in that Loot Train Attack alone, I mean, you have like this CG character amidst all the practical effects that they did with the actual like on-set fire and explosions and actually people on fire, mixing in all the digital doubles as we talked about. And then, yeah, the main character of this scene, the villain, I guess, if you will, of the scene, depending on how you want to look at that in particular, is not even real. Yet you're never thinking that. You're just, again, in a weird mind trick here. You're like, yeah, dragons, that's a thing. They just had a dragon because it looks so real. It's phenomenal. So yeah. I would probably go with the Loot Train Attack. If I had to say, that's probably the one I would go with. So, moving on to outstanding virtual cinematography in a photoreal project, we have Beauty and the Beast, the Be Our Guest scene, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the Groot dance opening fight. We have Star Wars The Last Jedi, the Krot surface battle, and Thor Ragnarok Valkyrie's flashback. Those are all tremendous scenes.
On that one, I got to go with the Thor Ragnarok stuff because the Valkyrie flashback section was really stunningly well done, and I love the super slow motion with the lights slowly rotating around them in real time as they're moving in this super hyper slow motion. It looked like almost like a fresco painting, and it was so beautiful and so wickedly cool at the same time. And one of the cool things that they did with that was they shot with a very high speed camera called the Phantom, and they had to have a special light rig that was perfectly timed to make it look like the lights were moving in real time while everything else is going super slow. And that sort of technicalities and that kind of craftsmanship with what they did, it's so beautiful, so well done.
Yeah, this is a phenomenal scene. It's easily one of my favorites. As far as from a visual effects standpoint in the film, that would probably be one of my favorite scenes. So, outstanding created environment in a photoreal feature. The nominees were Blade Runner 2049, Los Angeles. They were nominated for the Trash Mesa and Vegas. War for the Planet of the Apes was nominated for the Hidden Fortress and Prison Camp. So, a lot of nominations for both films. Which one? I mean, obviously, it's probably going to be Blade Runner, but which of those three do you think is going to win out?
Well, I mean, Planet of the Apes, again, great stuff. Both the Prison Camp and Hidden Fortress were really amazing, but you got to go with Blade Runner because, those environments look so flippin' good. And a lot of that has to be owed respect to the cinematographer, Roger Deakins. And Rod Deakins is up for an Oscar this year. He's never won one. If he doesn't win one, I'm going to riot personally. But out of those, I love the Vegas sequence. That burnt umber orange glow of everything and the whole look of it. And it just was so amazing and beautiful.
I mean, visually very striking. Like, there's not much else like that out there in film to date that looks that recognizable. Like, you see any scene from the Vegas scenes in this film, you automatically are like, oh yeah, that's Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, and what's really amazing about it is how stark it is. You know, a lot of times these environments, it's all about how much crap can we put into it.
Right.
All this stuff. Oh, look at all the detail. Whereas like the Vegas one, it's like less is more. It's so beautiful, and it's stunning. My first time I saw it in the trailer, my jaw dropped to the floor, and when I finally saw it in the movie with the sound design and everything else, it just was like, oh my god, it was awesome.
I mean, rarely do you use the word perfection in dealing with cinema, but it is, in my mind, very much cinematic perfection. Like, it's stunning. Like, there is that moment when you're watching that scene, like you had mentioned, you're just like, I am completely invested. Like, you have my complete attention. Just visually alone. Obviously, the scene itself is a big scene without getting into spoilers for people who haven't seen the film, but moving on to outstanding animated character in a photoreal feature, we have Blade Runner 2049 with Rachel, and Kong Skull Island was nominated for the main character, which is Kong himself. War for the Planet of the Apes was nominated for both Bad Ape and Caesar. So we had touched on Rachel before, but now seeing the rest of the nominees, do you think that you would change your opinion on that, or would you stick with Rachel?
Well, let's see. We've got 3 apes versus a human. And, I'll probably mention this again at some other point, but there's when you look at an animated character and you're trying to judge its quality, it's really difficult to do people. It's really difficult. It's the hardest thing that we know to do, and that's because we are people. So when you look at Rachel and it comes across like, oh wow, that was an effect. Holy crap, I had no idea. That means it leaped across the uncanny valley. Whereas King Kong, Bad Ape, and Caesar are all apes and of one form or the other. They look good. They're really well done. But at the end of the day, they're not us. So if you were to put another ape and ask them to tell me which one's better, they might go, well, those are all stupid because they're not real. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, but it's like we're they look real, but we're not the best judge of that because it's hard to quantify how good that is because we're not monkeys or apes.
Exactly. Well, and I think also that they're not real going into it, right? Like that it's not an actual person in a suit. They're fully CG. Whereas in the Rachel scene, at first you're like, man, there's someone out there that looks exactly like her. Like, how did they find this? Because that's what you immediately go to because it's so convincing that I feel like it's almost a totally different mindset you're going into that film because you're looking at them completely differently, touching on what you
Yeah.
said.
Well,
So,
I would definitely go with Rachel for this category, but if I was going not with Blade Runner, I would probably pick Kong because Skull Island was a bit of a surprise for me, and I really empathized with his character and saw so much soul in him that I never thought was. I just I've seen the King Kong movies and I thought this was just another one, and it really surprised me, really blew me away.
yeah, I remember going into that as well, kind of just like, like I'm excited, but it's, another Kong movie. And then actually seeing it, I feel like it was very underrated in a way because it was a lot better of a film than I expected.
And can we really vote for anything from War of the Planet of the Apes, like Caesar or Bad Ape, when Andy Serkis is running around saying, "Oh, this is an animated character. I acted it. It's just digital makeup." So I maybe he's right.
I don't know, man. The ongoing debate, right?
Yeah,
He's not
yeah.
well
I'm
liked by the
tongue in
touch-up
cheek.
artists that have to. Yeah, definitely. So, and for those listeners who haven't heard, I'll leave a link because there's some pretty bad ones out there of like interviews that he's given where he basically just gives no credit at all to the motion capture artists, the animators that have to then touch up the work. I mean, again, there's only so much a human, especially in this case, can do to replicate how an ape would walk, but there's still a lot more that goes into those minute little details or even just making it more convincing that are done by dozens of animators, if not more than that. And unfortunately, time and time again, he does not give them credit, which is crazy considering the fact that he owns a motion capture studio.
Of course.
Like, I'm not gonna. Yeah, we'll move on. I'm
Bit
getting
of a
on that
rat
rant
hole.
there, but right. I mean, I'm excited to see Andy Serkis in the upcoming Black Panther movie as himself. You did all the scenes in that. That was you. Well, to a degree, there might be some CG doubles in there for certain scenes, but I'm sure he did all the work for that as well. So, God. Moving on to the main categories we have here, which would be outstanding supporting visual effects and a photoreal feature. The nominees were Darkest Hour, Downsizing, Dunkirk, Mother, and Only the Brave.
Yeah, well, I've watched the clips on some of these, but I've seen all the movies except for Only the Brave. Only the Brave had a lot of like fire dynamics and things like that. But the one that surprised me the most was Darren Aronofsky's Mother, and I don't know if you got to see that,
Unfortunately, I did not.
but that was a incredibly different kind of movie, and the types of visual effects work in it were really unique and different. And I kind of have to go with that because I think that was really not very outside the box. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it.
Now I want to see it, especially we're talking about the visual effects and you're talking about outside the box. It does make the mind wonder. Again, obviously you're trying not to give away any spoilers, so
Well,
I appreciate that.
a lot of it is very invisible, and I was really surprised to learn. There's a major fire in this, and I thought a lot of it was compositing tricks, but a lot of it was actually like time lapse of them actually setting things on fire and decaying it,
Jeez.
and then running it backwards and then augmenting it with dynamics and all sorts of stuff like this. And it was just a unique experience, and I was really blown away by some of the work in it.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to check this film out. So, moving on to the final category that we're going to talk about here on the show for the VES Awards is Outstanding Visual Effects in a Photoreal Feature. The nominees were Blade Runner 2049, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Kong Skull Island, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and rounding out the list was War for the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, so again, this is incredible work. Planet of the Apes was phenomenal, just as good as the last one. Some of the rendering of that looked much improved. Star Wars is Star Wars. ILM always does fantastic work, and at the end with the super freighters or the super star destroyers getting sliced in half from the light speed effect just blew my mind. That was awesome. Skull Island was really great. Guardians of the Galaxy was a lot of fun. Had some really great stuff in there. But my pick is Blade Runner, and it's not just because of. I mean, those Joy holograms were phenomenal. The digital Rachel, the use of miniature work, the everything about that film was near perfection. It had a breadth of all these different techniques and of not only old practical effects but new digital ones, and they were all in service of the story in ways that were really refreshing.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, obviously, the other films were great in their own right, but you watch Blade Runner, and as long as that film is, you're talking about a 2 hour and 43-minute runtime, never at all throughout that entire time was I like thinking about the visual effects. We see visual effects so much, even like audience members, that they feel like they can like spot visual effects, right? They're like, oh, well, that's a visual effect, but that's like, I know what I'm talking about. I've seen movies or even visual effects artists who actually do know what they're talking about. Like, oh, well, clearly, there's some stray rotos here or whatever, what have you. But with Blade Runner 2049, I mean, I'm watching a film. I'm not watching for visual effects, which is really hard for me to do being in the industry. You're always nitpicking. I completely lost myself to the film itself than, nitpicking.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's a great choice. So something else I'd love to get your opinion on, moving from the VES Awards, would be for the 90th Academy Awards, the Best Visual Effects category. I would, something I'd like to point out to the audience, if you are going to be hedging your bets, right? You're going to be placing some bets on the Academy Awards. A really good idea to get an idea of who's going to win is to check out all the individual guild awards, the Producers Guild, Directors Guild, and in our case, what we're talking about here on the show, the Visual Effects Society. Time and time again, I would say there's usually 80-90%, probably higher than that, chance that the category winner will be the category winner for those individual award ceremonies. So, and to kind of speak on that, the nominees for Best Visual Effects were Blade Runner 2049, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Kong Skull Island, Star Wars The Last Jedi, and War for the Planet of the Apes, which, if you may have forgotten, are the exact same nominees for Outstanding Visual Effects in a Photoreal Feature for the VES Awards. So what do you think the Oscars and how they're going to go What do you think they might choose?
Well, the Oscars are so much a different animal than the VES. But see, the wild card here, though, is the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences is its membership base is about 90% SAG actors. And they don't vote in the same way that we do.
True.
So I think Planet of the Apes is out of the running because of Andy Serkis running around saying, I'm an actor, I'm an actor, I'm an actor, digital makeup. That every other year that Apes has been in contention, it has never won, even though that in past years I thought it was better than what it was competing against. I just don't think the actors are going to see that as anything but a front to their craft, and they just won't vote for it. Star Wars, everybody sees Star Wars, but there's Star Wars movies coming out every year, and the work has been consistently amazing, but I just think that maybe the Academy may just kind of gloss over that. Skull Island didn't really. Maybe. And Guardians of the Galaxy, maybe. But I also have reservations for them picking Blade Runner. I think Blade Runner should win, obviously. But it's the one on the list that wasn't a financial success. And usually when a movie isn't as been deemed a box office flop, Oscar tends to shun away from it. That hasn't always been the case because everybody seems to point that out this year with Blade Runner, but they forget the fact that the movie Hugo was a huge box office disappointment, but it won for visual effects and was up for 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. So it's always such a hard thing to predict, and just a few years ago, nobody predicted that Ex Machina was going to win the Oscar, and
That
came
was
out
another
of,
one, yep.
Yeah, that came out of left field. Here, it was up against a Star Wars movie, and they gave it to Ex Machina, which was a indie low budget film that had some really good VFX, and it was the black horse. You know, it was the wild card, and so I used to have a pretty good thumb on this stuff, but I just don't anymore. The changing demographic of the Academy, it's hard to predict which one I think will win.
Yeah, I mean, I think in narrowing it down to just those three, right? If they were just choosing between Skull Island, Guardians, and Blade Runner 2049, I feel like from a film standpoint, if you were going off of the film, right, not its financial successes or losses, I would go with Blade Runner 2049. But again, we can't really tell how they're going to vote on that. But good insights, I think. So before I end the show, I would love to know if there's anything else that you would like to promote, or if there's where can people find you? What are some projects that you're involved in that the audience can check out?
Well, of course, you can always find me at my website. It's danimation.com. That's DANIMATION, animation with a D. And that's my home site. And on there, I offer a lot of interesting things, including training. So I teach visual effects at the Dave School, of course, but I also do one-on-one mentorships that can be found out about through my website, as well as I've done some courses over at fxphd.com, and I recently completed a course for Pluralsight on channel fundamentals for Nuke, and that one's been a really good course. I've gotten a lot of feedback on it, and people are enjoying it and learning a lot about it. And most recently, I've been doing some stuff with pixelfondue.com to give some free training out to the industry. So about I try to release a video once a week that's about 2 to 3 minutes long that answers a question about compositing or nuke or visual effects and gets to the point, So that way, if somebody says, hey, what is God rays? And they could go, God rays, nuke, and here's a 2-minute thing that will take you through the whole process of understanding that concept. And those are free. Those are on YouTube and other social media. And that's at pixelfondue.com.
Very cool. Yeah, and I've seen some of them myself, and like they're easily digestible. They get right to the point, and also they've been performing really well from what I've seen. So, and good feedback on all the videos that I've seen. So, definitely awesome. And something else, we'll leave a link to all the topics that we talked about here on the show today, as well as the links that we just talked about here, and where you can find these videos, as well as the online mentorship, or perhaps you like to just see Dan in person and take a class at the Digital Animation and Visual Effects School. Leave a link to that as well. So, but thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to stop by the Film Revere podcast, Dan.
Oh, hell yeah. This has been awesome. And it's really awesome to see a former student, diving into this sort of thing. As you remember, I was very big on, film history and movies, and here you are doing a podcast about film. So that's just awesome. I love to see that. So, thank you so much for having me. So.
Well, that's the end of episode 9 of the Film Revere podcast. Be sure to show your support for the FR podcast by leaving a review on iTunes, Google Play Music, or wherever you happen to listen to the show. Another great way to show your support is by becoming a Film Revered Patreon at patreon.com/filmrevered. If you enjoy the show and would like to ask a question for the podcast, feel free to email me at filmrevered@gmail.com. Thanks again from all of us here at Film Revered. Have a great week.